All right, let's get right into it. For years, Apple has been the undisputed master of taking tech that's already out there, polishing it to perfection, and then selling it to us like it's brand new. But with Apple Intelligence, their big AI push, something went really, really wrong. What we're talking about here is a rare, almost shocking failure from one of the most buttoned-up companies on Earth. I mean, think about it. This is the company that gave us the iPhone and the Apple Watch. Their whole strategy, their playbook is built on waiting. They let other companies make the mistakes, then they swoop in with a product that finally just works. They don't invent the category, they redefine it. That's the Apple we all know. So that brings us to the billion-dollar question, right? With that kind of track record, how on earth did Apple manage to completely botch generative AI? This is arguably the biggest tech shift since the smartphone itself. It's an incredible story of chaos behind the scenes and a corporate culture that just wasn't ready. Okay, so to really get what happened, we've got to start with the public launch, or, well, the lack of one. The big promise of Apple Intelligence pretty quickly turned into a huge mess. A whole year, one full year after they announced it, Apple Intelligence is still basically vaporware. You know, a feature that was promised to millions of people buying new iPhones, but it just wasn't there. And even a year later, at their 2025 developer conference, they were still talking about it like everything was fine. And you know, a broken promise like that has real-world consequences. We're talking multiple class action lawsuits filed against them, all accusing Apple of false advertising. The argument is pretty simple, really. Apple's commercials made it seem like these amazing features would be ready to go, but they weren't. You just can't sell millions of phones based on something that doesn't actually exist. But here's the craziest part. The most impressive stuff from their first demo? Totally faked. Reports say that whole sequence where Siri was pulling flight info from mail, checking messages for lunch plans, and then mapping a route, it never actually ran on a real device. The only part that was real was that cool-looking pulsing rainbow graphic. Apparently, even Apple's own head of software was shocked at how little the real thing could actually do. So yeah, the launch was a complete disaster. But why? To find the real reason, you have to look back at Apple's first big bet on AI and how they basically let it wither on the vine for more than a decade. Let's talk about Siri. This timeline just says it all, doesn't it? When Siri came out way back in 2011, it felt like something out of a sci-fi movie. But over the next 10 years, while Amazon's Alexa and the Google Assistant were getting smarter and smarter, Siri just didn't. By 2025, it had become a punchline, unable to do even kind of basic things. We've all seen this, right? You ask Siri a slightly complicated question, and instead of a smart answer, you get this classic cop-out. It's not an AI assistant at that point, it's just a voice-activated Google search. And that's miles away from what we expect now. And the gap between them is just getting wider. You compare Siri to something like Google's Gemini Live, it's not even a contest. Gemini can have a real back-and-forth conversation. You can cut it off, ask another question, and it even uses your phone's camera to see what you're looking at. So while Apple was stuck in the past, everyone else was busy building the future. But this wasn't just a tech problem. The failure of Siri and then Apple Intelligence was really born from years of bitter infighting, constant leadership changes, and just total organizational chaos. The chaos really started right after Steve Jobs passed away. The Siri team was just thrown into turmoil. Leadership was a revolving door. One executive fought with the team and would only greenlight updates once a year. Then, after that whole Apple Maps disaster, both he and his boss got fired. A new guy came in, but by then the damage was done. The team was broken, and a bunch of key engineers just left. Then, in 2018, it seemed like things might finally turn around. Apple made a huge move and poached John Giannandrea, or JG, who was Google's head of AI. This was supposed to be the moment Apple finally got serious. But instead of fixing things, it basically started a civil war. JG's official team moved so slowly that other engineers nicknamed it aimless. At the same time, Apple's software chief, Craig Federighi, had so little faith in them that he quietly built a second parallel AI team inside his own division. So you had two teams fighting for money and talent. It was a complete recipe for disaster. But underneath all that infighting was an even deeper issue. Apple's entire corporate culture was basically the opposite of what you need to build modern AI. And this slide just nails the problem. Apple's whole identity is built on secrecy, perfection, and having that big, dramatic one more thing reveal. But building AI is the exact opposite. It's messy, it's open, it's all about experimenting and releasing public betas so you can learn and get better. Apple's greatest strength, its iron-fisted control, became its biggest weakness. And this lack of understanding had real effects. When the AI teams asked for the resources they needed to actually compete, Apple CFO supposedly cut their chip budget in half and told them to do more with less. I mean, come on, you can't win the AI arms race when you're pinching pennies. And just look at the result. Apple's engineers were basically fighting with one hand tied behind their back. They didn't have enough computing power, they were using old equipment, and get this, they had to go ask competitors like Google and Amazon if they could use their servers. And to top it all off, when ChatGPT exploded onto the scene, Apple's leadership just downplayed it. They completely missed the boat. So, what do you get when you mix a faked demo, a decade of neglect, internal warfare, and a culture that's totally out of sync? Let's look at the aftermath of this perfect storm and what it all means for Apple now. The fallout was fast, and it was brutal. After the weak reception at their 2024 conference, reports came out that Tim Cook had lost all confidence in his AI chief, JG. So control of Siri was taken away from him and given to the executive who led the Vision Pro headset. And all this time, those class action lawsuits just kept piling. What's really interesting is that at their next big conference, Apple announced this huge visual redesign for all of its software. And a lot of people pointed out that this big, flashy overhaul felt like a very convenient way to distract everybody from the fact that their main AI project was still missing in action. Which leaves us with one last really big question. For a company that's famous for getting the details right, this whole mess feels so un-Apple. So what do you think? Is this just a temporary stumble for a great company? Or is it a crack in the foundation? A sign that maybe the world's most valuable tech company is starting to lose its way?